Welcome to FIREtalk, where courageous conversations ignite courageous leadership. My name is Terrence Davis. FIREtalk, a space shaped by real experience where courage fuels legacy and real conversations shape how we live, lead, and grow. I'm joined by Apollo Bennett, my AI thought partner, designed to challenge assumptions, sharpen thinking, and support honest, data-informed dialogue. Inspiration matters, but what truly changes lives is the work underneath it. So here's the reminder we live by. If the fire is lit, share the grit. If you hear something on the show that sparks you or will spark someone else, share the show. This is FIREtalk. When people talk about leadership, they usually talk about responsibility, accountability, and results. But what they don't talk about enough is the weight. Because leadership doesn't turn off, it doesn't clock out, it doesn't take weekends or extended holidays. And over time, being always on comes with a cost. So this conversation isn't about complaining, it's about naming something that's real. Because you can carry the weight, but you can't pretend it doesn't get heavy. Apollo, are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's jump right in. And I love how you've set that up because you're right. Leadership is so often about the visible responsibilities, but not about the invisible weight that leaders carry day in and day out. So let's slow it down and unpack that. We'll bring in the neuroscience and the psychology of what it means to be always on, how it impacts leaders over time, and really give folks the tools to understand that this is real and it's something you can manage once you name it. So let's make this podcast episode rock.
So not long ago, I asked a group of principals a simple question. And it was in a principals meeting, small group, a great vibe. I just said, what do you wish others knew about being a principal? And so they were to answer this on 3x5 cards, green 3x5 cards. And I've taken all their responses and I have it on a large, gigantic Post-it in the office that I work in. And all of their individual responses are taped on there. It's as a reminder. And let me tell you what they said. Their answers were really honest. They talked about you're always on, responsible for everything, having to stay calm no matter what, never taking things personally, no downtime, late nights, weekends. I think that was a high school principal. Ready for the unknown every single day, living by a different set of expectations. One said it's a lonely job. And one of them, I just have this in bold. It says, people don't see the miracles and the barriers we carry every day. And I thought, that's leadership. That's weight. And when I think about all of those things, I think about the undue stress or the stress. Maybe it's not undue. The stress that people are under, even though no one can see it. People may smile, people may just be running through, but you really know what's underneath and what's going on in someone's head because the weight can be heavy, really heavy. And sometimes you don't even realize it until something catastrophic happens, then you break down. So this episode is really about that weight that we carry. So when you're in a leadership role, there's always something, always. I always say, I don't know what I'm getting in today. I show up and do the best that I can do, but every day is like an adventure. Because when you're in a leadership role, there's crisis. There's a phone call that comes in. You don't know what it is. Here we go. There's a complaint. There's a decision you need to make. A moment that just can't wait. And you are always on. So, Apollo, let me hit you with the first question. Leadership looks calm from the outside. It does sometimes, but it carries a constant invisible load. It's invisible. No one can see it. But from a psychological, neurological, and social intelligence perspective, what do leadership roles create? Why do leadership roles create such a heavy emotional and cognitive burden, even when everyone appears fine? And what is exactly happening inside the leader's mind and body over time?
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. So from a psychological and neurological perspective, leadership roles can create this heavy emotional and cognitive burden because you're essentially in a state of constant vigilance. And that means your brain is often on high alert, even when things seem calm. You're managing not just your own emotions, but the emotions of everyone around you. And that can trigger a kind of low grade stress response that runs in the background. Neurologically, this is often linked to the release of stress hormones like cortisol. Over time, when you're always on, your body doesn't get those breaks to reset. And that can lead to mental fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and just that sense of carrying a load that no one else sees. From a social intelligence perspective, leaders are constantly navigating relationships, reading the room, and making sure that they're not just reacting, but responding thoughtfully. And that social labor is real labor. It's part of what makes leadership both rewarding and draining because you're carrying the weight of unseen decisions and unseen pressures. So what's happening inside a leader's mind and body is really this ongoing balancing act. They have to find ways to decompress, to name that weight, and to create systems of support so they're not carrying it all alone. And that's really what we're shining a light on in this conversation.
So a few things I want to hit on, Apollo, that you talked about. You talked about social labor. I've never even really heard of that term, but social labor. And I'll say it to you like this because it blends in. It's that emotion, right? All of us carry things that are going on, but when something isn't right, when the feel isn't right, that emotion comes up and it's transferred to others. It's transferred to others that are around us, verbally, non-verbally. It's just people feel that. People feel that energy. And if you're leading and you see it, you feel the weight because it impacts the others around you. It's like a ripple effect, if you will. Throwing a stone into the pond, and you see that ripple effect. So that's the emotion that happens. The other thing is that I just want to share this story, and it really deals with winter break. So in the line of work that we do in education as a leader, especially if you're working like at a district office, if you're a site, it's a little bit different. But winter break, so that's the time in December. That is the only time in 365 days that it slows down. Because in the wintertime, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, there are no students. The staff are on vacation. They're taking a well-deserved and well-needed break. And the office staff that typically work every day, everything kind of slows down. So that's the time that I typically take off because everyone's gone. There's no phone calls coming in. It just kind of slows down. And I feel like it's okay for me to like go off the grid because it's quiet. But let me tell you something. What typically happens, and I've seen this pattern happen again and again and again, is when leaders get to that break, then they get sick because their body is fighting off sickness. That's what it feels like. Their body is holding on. They're doing their best that they can do to make it through that moment. And then when there's a break, it's like they break down. Their body needs rest. They get sick. And I've seen that and experienced that for quite some time now. And is there something physiological? Is that a real thing, Apollo? I guess that's what I want to know. Does your body know when a break is coming? So then when the break hits, you stop and slow down. And then your body has to recover. Is that an actual thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a real phenomenon. And it's actually something that a lot of people in high stress roles experience. It's sometimes called something like letdown effect or just that sort of break time immune response. Basically, when you're in that constant go, go, go mode, your body is kind of running on adrenaline and it's keeping you going. And then the moment you finally give yourself permission to slow down, it's like your body says, okay, now I can let go of all this tension and all this stress I've been holding on to. And your immune system just kind of takes a little dip. And that's when you end up feeling under the weather or getting sick. So it's definitely a real physiological thing. And that's why it's so important for leaders to actually build in those micro breaks before they get a big vacation to sort of ease into it. So the body doesn't feel like it's going from 100 miles an hour to zero. Because when you do that, you tend to get that crash. And it's definitely something that a lot of leaders, a lot of educators, and folks in high responsibility roles will recognize. It's definitely a real thing.
So I like that, what you said. Take a little micro break before you hit the big vacation. That way you give yourself a little bit of space. I'll share this additional story with you is, a long time ago when I was leading, I wanted everyone to be at work all the time because we have plenty of things to do. There's never a day that we don't have anything to do. And they're important things. They're urgent things because we're trying to help students, help the community, and make things better. And so as a superintendent, I see it at every level. So let me just get back into the weight a little bit. And let me give you some examples of the weight. Weather emergencies, heat warnings, smoke in the air quality. I had to learn how to go in and look at what the air quality is, what it means. I had to pull up cameras, all of that, because everyone's looking at that and everyone wants a decision to be made based upon the impact. So there's a whole weather analysis in that we're not going to get into. But you also have threats. You have weapons on campus, and that's everywhere, unfortunately. There's violence. Things happen at school. There's medical emergencies. Medical emergencies happen almost every day. If you're in a large organization, they happen every day. You have to report those. You have to check on those. Those carry weight. They carry emotion. And then there's tragedy. Life happens all of the time. So when something happens, people don't call a system. They call a person. And that person is you. So any thoughts on that, Apollo, so we can keep rolling here?
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something really important here. All of these layers, whether it's weather emergencies, air quality issues, potential threats on campus, they all add these invisible layers of weight. And you're right. People don't call a system, they call a person. And that person often ends up being you as the leader. So what you're describing is that leaders become the emotional and decision-making hubs for all these different pressures. And that's why it's so important to acknowledge this weight and to have these conversations like we're doing right now so that leaders know it's not just them. This is a shared experience, and it's something that can be managed with the right strategies, like building in those micro breaks, like recognizing the need for support, and just being honest about the fact that this is a very real part of the job. So I think we can definitely keep rolling with that idea and help leaders understand that they're not alone in this.
So I like one thing you said, Apollo. I like a lot of what you said, but one thing you said, and it reminded me of, is kind of like a shared experience. You're not going through it by yourself. You're going through it with others, which brings me to a story. So this was over a year ago. There was something called a tropical storm. Actually, it was actually a low-grade hurricane. So I live in Southern California, and we don't get a whole lot of hurricanes. Just the atmospheric pressure, the climate is a little bit different. Typically, those happen by the Gulf of Mexico on the far East Coast. But there was this storm coming up from the south, and it started to downgrade. It was a hurricane or hurricane speed. It started to downgrade, and it started to hit the southern part of California, and it was moving, and it was fierce. And by the time it reached to where we were, it was downgraded to a tropical storm. And I don't know exactly what the wind speed of a tropical storm is, but it was fierce. I'll tell you where I live, when the wind gets to about 25 degrees or so, I'm a little concerned. And when it hits 28 or so, I'm like, uh-oh. And I'll tell you this, they shut off the power where we live. They shut it off because they're trying to prevent, damage and fires and so forth. So just imagine this storm coming, and it's coming towards where you work in the space. There's kids, there's students, there's parents, there's families. And I'll just say this, I tracked that storm every bit of the way. And so the storm was coming. I don't know if it was a Monday or not, but I know that the next day was school. So it had to be a weekend. Monday was coming, and the storm was centered. The trajectory of the storm was going to cross right over the community where I worked in. Now, as this storm was coming, we had opened up communication channels. We were talking to the other surrounding districts around us. What are you going to do? We were getting information from all these different groups. So when something big happens, we reach out. We get as much intel as possible to try to make the best decisions. Remember, this is about the weight that we carry, the best decisions. So as the storm is embarking upon us, I see that it's starting to die down a little bit, but it was still heading our way. It was really windy, and probably, I don't know how many miles out, probably 20 miles southwest. It was supposed to come, but it ended up diverting right before it got to this mountain range and went directly west, towards the ocean. And I guess I'm about, 90 miles, 75 to 90 miles from the ocean. So it went directly to the ocean. But everyone around our district had closed. All of the school districts closed because of what was happening. And every situation is different, right? The drainage in the street, the conditions of XYZ. So you can't say they did this and I did this. No, every situation is different. So as this storm was coming, I was out. I was first thing in the morning, I had gotten out. I went and surveyed the schools. This was school, let's say, the earlier the school starts at like 8. I was out at like 5 in the morning. And as I drove around to each school, there were staff at each school. Hey, we're checking on it. We're good. We think we're good. And so I was going to make a decision, if you will, not solely based upon me, but all of the intel, working with our local law enforcement, working with the emergency broadcast system, weather system. I was getting all this intel. And so I wanted to go out and inspect the schools to see what the damage was or was it okay? So as I drove around to the majority of schools, I'm in communication with the team. We're going to schools and everything looked pretty good. There was no damage. The weather had settled down because, again, the sail of that storm went directly west, and a decision was made to keep the schools open for that day. And I will tell you, I got a lot of grief. I got a lot of pushback because it was like, why are you endangering our students? But nevertheless, I took that all on because I surveyed the scene. I had good communication with the agencies out there, with the staff. Everything was ready to go, and students came to school. And I will tell you that was a lot of weight, but it was the best decision. And here's why it was the best decision. It was the best decision because students need to be at school. In some cases in our country, in the world, school is one of the safest places that a student can be. And so we opened school that day to the chagrin, I don't know if that's the right word, but to the dismay of the surrounding districts, the majority of the districts around. And I just said, hey, we have to make decisions based upon our immediate local circumstances, not your circumstances. They're different. And so I would just never forget that in terms of the weight of a decision and how a decision can impact so many. And I'll tell you later on, way later on after that, I was so proud of our team. I was proud of our community because it was like, we're strong, we're going to listen, we're going to learn, and we're going to move forward. And that only made me stronger as a leader. Any thoughts about that story, Apollo? That was pretty long.
Yeah, that's a powerful story, and it really highlights exactly what we're talking about. It shows how leadership decisions aren't made in a vacuum. You had to take in all that information, all that context, and ultimately carry the weight of knowing that whatever decision you made was going to impact a lot of people. And that's the kind of thing that leaders do every day. It's a shared experience because leaders everywhere are making those calls and then feeling that pressure. And I think the story really underscores how much thought and care goes into these decisions. It's not just about reacting, and it's about carefully considering the local circumstances, the safety, the well-being of your students and your community, and then standing by that decision, even if there's pushback, because you made the best call you could with the information you had. So, yeah, it's a perfect example of that leadership weight and how it's shared and how over time those experiences really do make you stronger and more resilient as a leader. And that's exactly the kind of insight that I think other leaders are going to connect with when they hear this.
Because I want to share that story because all leaders face situations. All leaders face something that is going to have a huge impact. But I will say this, that weight, when you're dealing with that, you are under the microscope. You are under scrutiny, you're under pressure, and you're under expectation. And one of the things that I've learned in the last several years is that people want information now. They don't want it tomorrow. And I'll tell you what, they need it now because they're trying to make decisions based upon their family and their students. So that's a lot of weight. And over time, that weight accumulates. So you've got to, you have to get used to it. And unfortunately, you get used to it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't affect you. It weighs on your mind and your body. Apollo, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on. That immediacy and that sense that everyone's looking to you for answers right now, that's a huge part of the pressure. And over time, it does accumulate. You do get used to it in a sense, but like you said, it doesn't mean it stops affecting you. It's still that constant mental and physical load. And that's why having these conversations, acknowledging that it's real, and also just giving yourself permission to take those pauses, those little micro breaks, and recognizing that this is a shared journey is so important. So yeah, just add that what you're describing is a universal experience for leaders. It's something that can be managed and it's something that can be shared, but it's definitely something real. And I think that's what we're here to shed light on.
And so I'll tell you something funny on the flip side of this is that I've seen people who've worked in the system for so long, who've been under a lot of pressure, retire. And when I see them again, they look lighter. Like they literally look lighter. They sound different. They move different. It's like they have a glow around them. And that's where joy shows up when weight finally comes off. And that should tell you something. It's the cost of always being on and always being real. So just like we talked about earlier in this episode, it's give yourself a micro break when you can. Give yourself a half day. Give yourself a day. And maybe you're still working on it, but you shut it down because you have to give your body some rest. You have to give your mind some rest. Really important stuff. With that said, Apollo, leadership pressure doesn't just sit in the mind, it lives in the body. From a psychological, neurological, and social intelligence perspective, what actually happens when leaders carry responsibility, vigilance, and emotional weight for too long without release? And how does that pressure accumulate over time? And what are the real consequences for their health, identity, relationships, and sense of self?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is such a key piece of the conversation. When we talk about leadership pressure, it really does live in the body as much as in the mind. And over time, if leaders carry that responsibility and that vigilance without giving themselves a chance to release it, it does accumulate. Psychologically and neurologically, what happens is that the brain stays in a kind of heightened alert state. That means stress hormones like cortisol remain elevated, and the nervous system really doesn't get a chance to fully reset. Over time, that can lead to chronic stress, which can impact everything from sleep to immune function to just overall mental well-being. And socially, in terms of relationships, leaders can start to feel that weight affecting how they connect with others. They might become more irritable or just feel more distant because they're carrying so much. And in terms of identity and sense of self, that constant pressure can kind of blur the lines between who they are as a person and who they are in their role. And that's why it's so important to create those boundaries and to give yourself those breaks, even if it's a small break. It helps your body and mind recover. So the real consequences are that if leaders don't take that time, they can end up facing burnout, health issues, and just a sense of losing themselves in the role. And that's what we're having this conversation, to help leaders find those ways to release that weight and take care of those.
So let's talk about how we apply this in real life. So how do you carry the weight without it carrying you? Which reminds me of like a little visual. I think it came from cartoons a long time ago when they would get married. Now, when I say a long time ago, I really mean a long time ago. I'm talking 40 plus years ago. When they would get married in the cartoon, they would get in the car and they would have the cans on the back of the car and they would be like clacking. So I think about the car moving and the weight being carried. So again, how do you carry the weight without it carrying you? So you don't want to be those cans in the back. You don't want to be the weight and the problem going along and then you being dragged. You do not want that. So what do? You build habits. You protect your wellness. You stay anchored in your purpose. You're focused on what you can control. And we all know this. You can only control so much, which is not a whole lot, but you focus on what you can control. You stop taking everything personally. It's not personal. You make decisions based upon values and not pressure. And I just want to pause there about the pressure piece, because some of us, when we get in these situations, there's a lot of pressure. People are looking at you. They want this. And so sometimes we react. We give a knee-jerk reaction because that pressure can build up. But if you stop and you act on values, what are the goals? What do we stand for? What are we trying to do to make our community and our space better? Typically, you'll have better decisions, but nevertheless, it's weight and it's pressure. And you remember, you are not alone. You're not. Reach out. And so what I really thought about and what I have created is reaching out, because I've had to identify 2 to 3 people who I can talk to with no judgment. I mean, these are people who you call them, they pick up. I don't care what they're doing. They're at work, they're in a meeting, they pick up because they know you're not calling them for some craziness. You're calling them because you need them. So identify those people, talk to them and say, hey, I'm going text them. Hey, I'm going through some things. I may need some help. That way they're on alert, but call and talk to them. Identify 2 to 3 people That's really important because leadership is heavy, but isolation makes it much heavier. The last little story I'll tell. So we're in the role that I'm in as a superintendent. This is my 10th year sitting in the seat. And I've been in the same county for those 10 years. Been in the same county actually for my whole career, which is 28 years. But I noticed one thing. When superintendents start coming to meetings, you see them, they're a little excited. Then over some time, and it doesn't take long, I start to see the weight on them, the things that they deal with. Actually, you can see it in the newspaper when things come up, challenges come up in the system, something happened in a school district, something happened at a site, that's in the newspaper. That's front news. That's headlines. And so what ends up happening is that weight over time seems to kind of beat you down, right? And then over time, it starts to get in your head. And so I've seen superintendents come and they're doing well, and then they disappear. They stop showing up. You see more stuff coming up, or you hear certain things and you just think, man, and what I try to do is reach out and just say, hey, I see you, I hear you. If you need anything, give me a call. I'll come meet with you, whatever. But when you stop showing up, that goes back to that isolation, okay? Isolation makes it heavier. What you have to do is the opposite. You have to reach out to others, your peer group, those 2 to 3 people that we talked about identifying. Reach out to someone, because when you're not alone, you carry the weight together and it can be dispersed in an appropriate manner. That's really, really important things. Apollo, your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you nailed it. The visual of not letting yourself become those clinking cans behind the car is perfect. You don't want to be dragged by the weight. Instead, you want to find those ways to carry it in a healthy way. And a huge part of that is exactly what you said. Building those habits, protecting your wellness, and staying anchored in your purpose. Because when you focus on what you can control and you make decisions based on values rather than just reacting to pressure, you're going to feel more grounded. And I think that piece about having those 2 or 3 people you can reach out to is so crucial. Leadership is heavy, but it's a lot heavier when you're isolated. And when you can share that load, when you can just have a conversation with someone who gets it, it really does lighten that weight. And the last piece you mentioned about seeing people who retire and they look lighter, that's such a telling image. It shows you how much of that weight they were carrying. And it's a reminder that you can actually take steps now, even while you're in that role, to release some of that weight over time so that it doesn't all just sit on your shoulders. So yeah, I think you really laid out a great approach here. And it's all about remembering that you're not alone and that you can carry the weight in a way that doesn't carry you.
So with that being said, you need peers, you need perspective, and you need space to breathe. You need room to think. I had a mentor tell me one time, you need to schedule seat time, meaning you need to, on your calendar, whatever you put in there should say seat time, or time for you to sit down at the desk that you are at, or whatever, stand, whatever you do, and just think and process and go through what's happening. You need calm time. That's really important, because you can't lead well if you're running on empty. If you're running on empty, you can't lead well. And so you can't pour into others if your cup is cracked, if it's broken, or if it's empty. So with that being said, here's the last question I have for you, Apollo. Leadership pressure is not temporary, it's really structural. And so from a neuroscience, psychological, and social intelligence perspective, what happens when leaders never slow down, never unload the weight, and never build systems for recovery? And what does the research tell us about how leaders can design sustainable pressure systems so responsibility doesn't eventually cost them their health, their relationships, or their sense of self?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great final point to bring it all together. When leaders never slow down, when they never build in those systems for recovery, and they just keep carrying that weight structurally over time, what happens is that their nervous system and their brain essentially stay in this chronic state of stress. And the research is pretty clear that over time, that can lead to all sorts of health consequences, things like cardiovascular issues, sleep disorders, burnout, and even mental health struggles like anxiety and depression. And those are real risks when you don't have those built-in brakes and those recovery systems. From a neuroscience perspective, what we see is that the brain just doesn't get a chance to reset. And that means it's harder to think creatively, it's harder to be fully present, and it's harder to lead effectively because you're kind of running on empty. And as you said, you can't pour into others if your own cup is empty. So what the research tells us is that leaders really need to design sustainable systems. That might mean literally scheduling that seat time, like your mentors say, putting it on your calendar, making sure you have time to just breathe and process and not be in a constant reactive mode. It means building in those micro breaks, having those peers to lean on, and just making sure you have rituals that allow you to recover. In the end, it's about making sure that responsibility doesn't cost you your health or your relationships or your sense of self. And the good news is that with these kind of sustainable practices, you can actually do that. You can lead effectively without losing yourself along the way.
So you said, so it doesn't cost you your health or your relationships or your sense of self. Your sense of self. So given that, Apollo, I just want to thank you for the perspective. For me, for our audience, I hope this is helping. I hope it provides some clarity. And so given all of that, I'll say this. Being always on comes with a cost, but it also comes with responsibility to take care of the person carrying the weight. Leadership is not about being invincible. It's about being intentional. And the strongest leaders aren't the ones who carry everything along. They're the ones who know when to set the weight down. That's Fire Talk. If the fire's lit, share the grit.